Fat girl begged Mountain Man, "Don't waste your time on me." He said, "You're all the time I want to waste." The laughter of wedding guests still rang in her ears as Cordelia Cora Pemberton stumbled alone toward Crystal Falls. At 26, she had become the last unmarried woman of her circle, and every whisper in the pews today had been about her. Too old, too plain, too heavy to ever catch a husband. She dropped to the rocks beside the thundering water, pulled her shawl tight, and let the sobs she had held back all afternoon escape her. "Why am I never enough?" she whispered to the roaring cascade, as though it might carry her question away. Behind her, a branch snapped. Cora froze, wiping at her face in panic. She turned and saw a man unlike anyone from town, broad-shouldered, tall, with hair the color of dark oak and eyes blue as mountain ice. He stood quietly, hands open, a question written on his face rather than judgment. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, deep, surprisingly gentle. "I'm fine," she blurted, scrambling to her feet. "I shouldn't be here. I'll go." "You're not trespassing. This place belongs to no one," he said softly, taking a careful step closer. "But you looked like you were carrying something heavier than tears." Cora shook her head, shame burning in her chest. "Don't waste your time worrying about me. I'm no one worth saving." The stranger's lips curved in a slow, unexpected smile. "You," he said with unshakable calm, "are all the time I want to waste." The words hung between them, carried on the mist of the falls, echoing louder than the water itself. And in that moment, Cora felt seen, not as the fat girl the town dismissed, but as a woman whose presence had just stolen the attention of a man who seemed made of the mountain itself. Cora Pemberton had grown up in Millbrook, a town where appearances seemed to matter more than kindness. From her earliest days, she had been the subject of whispered jokes, the girl with cheeks too round, arms too soft, a body that didn't fit the narrow mold others praised. Her father had passed when she was only 10, leaving her and her widowed mother to run the small boarding house on Main Street. By the time her mother died, Cora had taken over as the quiet, reliable librarian of the town's modest book hall. Books had become her closest companions. She lost herself in the poetry of Byron, the daring tales of Stevenson, the worlds of Austen, where heroines, no matter their circumstances, found love. Yet each time she closed a book and faced her reflection in the mirror, she felt the harsh contrast. She was not Elizabeth Bennet, not Jane Eyre. She was simply Cora the fat librarian, the label townsfolk had given her without mercy. The wedding she had attended earlier that day had carved the wound deeper. Her last close friend, a girl she had grown up with, now stood beaming on the arm of a handsome farmer. Cora had smiled through the ceremony, clapped at the vows, but her heart ached with loneliness. When one of the bridesmaids whispered, thinking Cora couldn't hear, "At least she won't end up like Cora, poor thing," the words cut sharper than any knife. That was why she had fled to Crystal Falls. The rush of water had always been her sanctuary, drowning out the gossip of town, muffling her sobs. Yet today, even the falls could not quiet the ache in her chest. Then came Augustus Thornfield. The townspeople called him strange, a recluse, the man who lived too long in the mountains. He appeared in Millbrook only rarely, to buy supplies or deliver pressed flowers and notes for the apothecary. Rumors said he had once been a professor in Boston. Others whispered he had killed a man. The truth was, no one really knew. What Cora saw, standing only a few feet away from her, was neither outlaw nor eccentric, but a man anchored by strength. His hands bore calluses of honest work, yet his eyes carried the weight of someone who had known betrayal. "Why were you crying?" Gus asked, his tone cautious, not demanding. Cora tried to laugh it off, though it came out brittle. "Because I was foolish enough to think I mattered." "You do," he replied simply, as though it were not up for debate. She blinked at him, unsure whether to believe. Every man in Millbrook had overlooked her, yet here was one who spoke as though her worth was a fact, not a question. The air between them thickened with the spray of the falls. Cora hugged her shawl tighter around herself, ashamed that even in grief her first instinct was to hide her body. But Gus didn't look at her the way other men did. No sneer, no condescension. His gaze was steady, respectful, as though she were an equal. "I spend most of my days cataloging plants," he said, almost awkwardly, as if offering a piece of himself to ease her discomfort. "But today, I think I was meant to find this place, to find you." Cora's heart lurched, torn between disbelief and a fragile bloom of hope. Could it be that she was not invisible after all? The days that followed that first encounter at Crystal Falls seemed to pull Cora and Gus together with a force neither fully understood. What had begun as a chance meeting soon turned into a quiet rhythm. She would bring a book and sit by the water, and he, somehow always appearing from the woods, would join her. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they sat in silence, listening to the cascade. Both silences and words felt natural in his presence. One afternoon, when Cora lingered longer than usual, Gus offered to walk her back toward town. She hesitated. After all, it would mean being seen with him on the open road. The townsfolk already gossiped mercilessly about her. Walking beside the mysterious recluse would only fuel their whispers. But the way he held her gaze, steady and unpressing, gave her courage. She nodded, and together they took the winding trail. The path wound through pine and cedar, where sunlight filtered in dapples of gold. The forest smelled of resin and earth, far from the coal smoke of town. Gus pointed out flowers growing along the edge, blue columbine, wild asters, herbs she'd never learned the names of. His voice softened when he spoke of them, as though each petal carried a secret worth protecting. "You see this?" he said, kneeling to touch a fern. "It only thrives in shade, hidden from the sun. People overlook it, but it's strong. It survives where others wither." Cora studied the plant, sensing the unspoken meaning beneath his words. "Like some people," she murmured. He glanced up at her then, and for a fleeting instant their eyes held something neither dared name. As dusk fell, the forest grew cooler. Gus slipped his coat from his shoulders and held it toward her. Cora protested at first. "You'll be cold." "I've been cold before," he said simply. "You need it more." His words, stripped of gallantry, felt honest. Reluctantly, she let him drape the heavy coat around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of pine smoke, leather, and something unmistakably his. When they reached the edge of Millbrook, Gus slowed his steps. "I won't go further," he said. "You shouldn't have to answer questions tonight." "You think they'll notice?" she asked bitterly. "They notice everything," he replied, "but their words don't define you." He tipped his head, blue eyes steady. "Don't let them." That night, lying in bed, Cora replayed his voice over and over. No man had ever spoken to her that way, not as though she were a problem or a joke, but as though she were worth defending. The following week, she found herself taking the long road toward Evergreen Ridge, where Gus kept his cabin. He hadn't invited her outright, yet she sensed he was waiting. Sure enough, halfway up the trail he appeared, carrying a basket of dried herbs. "You came," he said, a flicker of warmth in his voice. "Just for the air," she lied, though her pulse betrayed her. They hiked together toward his homestead, a modest cabin tucked between towering pines. Smoke curled gently from its chimney, and a small garden spread out beside it, rows of medicinal plants carefully tended. Cora felt a strange comfort as they stepped inside. The space was simple, yet full of quiet thought. Shelves lined with journals, pressed flowers between glass frames, a sturdy table where sketches of plants lay scattered. "You live here alone?" she asked softly. He nodded. "For years. At first it was penance. Then it became peace. But sometimes," he admitted, eyes flicking toward her, "it feels more like silence than peace." Her chest tightened at the honesty in his words. She knew that silence, the kind that wasn't restful, but heavy. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps their lonely paths had been leading to this very moment. Two solitary souls colliding by chance or fate. Cora had not planned to return to Gus's cabin after that first visit, yet something about the place and the man drew her back like a current she could not resist. The next Sunday, instead of attending church where whispers always clung to her like burrs, she found herself climbing the mountain path. Gus greeted her without surprise, as if he had known she would come. The cabin quickly became a sanctuary. Sunlight streamed through small paned windows, falling across shelves of books and jars filled with roots and leaves. A kettle often whistled on the iron stove, and the steady crackle of fire filled the silence between them. Unlike in town, silence here was not oppressive. It was companionable, almost warm. Cora began to help with little tasks, though Gus never asked her to. She swept the wooden floor, kneaded bread from flour he bought in town, and mended a tear in one of his shirts with careful stitches. Each time she offered her hands, he watched her with quiet gratitude rather than expectation. One evening, when she tried to serve his portion smaller than her own, he frowned. "Don't do that," he said firmly. She startled. "Do what?" "Pretend you need less than you do. You've spent too long believing you deserve scraps. Not here. You eat first." His words pierced her like both a wound and a balm. No one had ever noticed the way she unconsciously gave herself less, as though she needed to apologize for existing. Her throat tightened as she obeyed, tasting the stew he had prepared, rich with venison and wild herbs. Another night, Gus carried in a bundle of logs and dropped them by the hearth. "Would you like to learn?" he asked. "To split wood?" she said, incredulous. He nodded. "You're stronger than you think." Out in the clearing, he showed her how to hold the axe, how to breathe with the swing. At first, the blade glanced off, her arms shaking with the effort. But with his steady voice guiding her, "Plant your feet, keep your focus here," she managed to split a log cleanly in two. The thrill lit her face, and for once she did not care if her body looked clumsy. Gus's quiet smile told her he saw only strength. As days blurred into weeks, the rhythm of the cabin became their own. They gathered herbs together, her skirt brushing against his boots as they bent side by side. They read aloud in the evenings, Cora's voice filling the cabin with lines of poetry, while Gus listened with an attentiveness that made her blush. Sometimes He asked her opinion on a passage, and when she answered, he nodded as though her insight mattered more than any scholar's. It was in the smallest gestures that Cora's heart began to change. The way Gus always poured her tea first, how he placed a blanket across her lap without a word when the night grew cold, how he never once looked at her body with ridicule, only with a steady kind of reverence, as though she were not lacking but complete. One late afternoon, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Rain battered the roof, and wind howled against the shutters. Cora startled at the thunder, memories of lonely nights pressing in. Gus reached out then, not to touch her, but to set his hand near hers on the table, close enough she could bridge the space if she chose. For long moments she stared at their almost touching hands, the storm raging around them, until at last her fingers slid over his. His grip closed gently, strong yet careful, as though holding something precious. No words were spoken, but Cora felt the shift in her soul. She was no longer the fat girl hiding in the shadows of Millbrook. She was a woman seated in the glow of a hearth, her hand clasped by a man who saw her fully and chose her still. In that cabin, surrounded by the scent of pine smoke and rain, Cora felt for the first time what it meant to be safe, to be wanted, not for what she could be, but for who she already was. For a time, Cora believed the world had forgotten her. Days in the cabin passed like pages in a treasured book, quiet, steady, comforting. Yet the outside world had not vanished. Whispers from Millbrook crept up the mountain like cold fog, carrying malice in every syllable. It began when Mrs. Constance Whitmore, the mayor's wife, caught sight of Cora walking back from the evergreen trail, cheeks flushed with happiness. That glimpse was enough. Soon tongues wagged. The fat spinster had trapped a reclusive scholar. She was surely scheming for his land. She had bewitched him with desperation. The rumors stung, though Cora pretended otherwise. She had lived her whole life under judgment. But now, when she finally tasted joy, the cruelty struck deeper. One evening, as she folded linens by the fire, she blurted, "They're saying I've deceived you, that I'm only here because of your land." Gus looked up from his writing desk, eyes narrowing. "And you believe them?" Her hands tightened on the cloth. "Why shouldn't I? People always assume the worst of me. Perhaps one day you will too." He rose, crossing the room in 2 strides. "Cora, I've been lied to before, betrayed by those I trusted most. But don't think for a moment I would mistake you for them. You're the only honest thing I've known in years." His conviction soothed her, yet the doubt gnawed still. It was not long before Mrs. Whitmore set her plan in motion. She sent her daughter Victoria, lovely and ambitious, up the mountain under the pretense of delivering supplies. Victoria swept into the cabin with the air of a queen. Her eyes slid over Cora with practiced disdain before settling on Gus. "You belong in the city, Professor Thornfield," she purred, "not wasting away in this wilderness, certainly not tied to this." Her gesture toward Cora was subtle, but cruel. Cora flushed, shame rising like fire in her chest. She fled outside before Gus could answer, the words echoing, "Not tied to this." Later, when Gus found her by the stream, she whispered, "She's right. I don't fit beside you. You could have anyone." His jaw tightened. "Cora, I don't want anyone. I want you." But the poison had been planted. That very week, another shadow emerged. A land agent arrived at the Whitmore estate, investigating rumors that the slopes of Evergreen hid rare medicinal plants plants worth fortunes if cultivated. If Gus held the rights, he could become a wealthy man. But if town authorities declared his land public resource, they could seize it. Word spread quickly that Mrs. Whitmore intended to challenge his claim, and Cora, they said, was part of the scheme, sent to seduce the reclusive botanist so she might share in the profits. One evening, after a trip to town for supplies, Gus returned grim-faced. "They're threatening to drag you into court," he said quietly, "claiming you plotted this with me." Cora's heart sank. "I would never—" "I know." He took her hand, squeezing hard. "But they won't stop. They want to shame you until you disappear." The weight of his words pressed heavy between them. For Gus, it was betrayal once more. Society clawing at him, trying to strip away what little peace he had built. For Cora, it was humiliation sharpened into fear. Would Gus tire of defending her? Would he one day believe the lies? That night, lying awake in the cabin, Cora stared into the dark rafters and wondered if she was strong enough to stay. If loving Gus meant he lost everything, perhaps the kindest act was to leave before the storm destroyed them both. The knock came at dusk. It was not the timid tap of a neighbor nor the steady rap of a friend. It was a pounding fist, insistent, angry. Gus rose from his chair, jaw tightening, as Cora clutched her shawl around her shoulders. When he opened the door, the entire Whitmore clan stood outside. Mayor Whitmore, his proud wife Constance, and their daughter Victoria, flanked by two deputies who looked uncomfortable but obedient. "Augustus Thornfield," the mayor barked, "you are hereby ordered to vacate this land until its rightful ownership is resolved. We have reason to believe you've been conducting improper dealings with this woman." His eyes flicked to Cora, dripping disdain. "A deceitful scheme to exploit our town's natural resources," Constance added with a venomous smile. "It is pitiful, really. A disgraced professor clinging to a desperate, overweight spinster. Hardly the future Millbrook needs." Cora flinched as though struck. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Gus stepped forward, his towering frame filling the doorway. "Enough," he said, voice low but edged with steel. "You dare insult her under my roof? Cora is worth more than every acre of land and every coin in your coffers combined. She is my partner, my equal, and if you've come to take her, you'll have to walk over my body first." The deputies shifted uneasily. One muttered, "Maybe we shouldn't." But the mayor silenced him with a glare. Victoria lifted her chin. "You're bewitched, Gus. Don't you see? She's beneath you. Release her, and perhaps we'll forgive your folly." Cora, trembling but resolute, stepped beside Gus. Her voice shook, but her words cut like glass. "I am not beneath him, and I will not leave him, not for your threats, not for your lies. If you want to drag me away, you'll have to drag us both." Gasps rose from the deputies. For the first time, the Whitmores faltered. They had expected tears, pleading, surrender, not defiance, not solidarity. The mayor sputtered, "You'll regret this insolence." But Gus raised his rifle, not pointing it, only holding it across his chest with calm authority. "I've fought in wars," he said quietly. "I've buried betrayal and survived loss. Do not think for a moment I'll let petty tyrants harm her. This cabin is our home. You have no power here." The standoff stretched until the deputies finally lowered their eyes, unwilling to follow an unjust order. With no support, the Whitmores turned, faces twisted in fury, retreating down the path into the night. As the sound of their departure faded, Cora collapsed against Gus's chest, tears spilling hot and fast. "You stood for me," she whispered. He cupped her face gently, his voice breaking with emotion. "No, Cora, we stood together, and nothing, nothing will ever part us again." That night, the cabin glowed like a lantern against the dark slopes of evergreen. Outside, the wind rattled branches and carried the last angry echoes of the Whitmores away. Inside, only warmth remained, firelight flickering over stacked books, simmering stew, and two hearts that refused to bend. Cora sat at the small table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She stared into the flames, eyes swollen from tears, yet calmer now. Gus set his rifle back above the mantel, then crossed the room and sank beside her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of fear released, of love unspoken, yet understood. Finally, Gus reached across the table, covering her hands with his. "You're safe here," he said softly. "No one can take that from us." Cora's lips trembled. "But what if they try again? What if the world out there never lets us be?" He drew her closer, his voice steady, his gaze unflinching. "Then let them try. This is your home now, if you'll have it." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "I'll have it," she whispered. "I'll have you." The fire popped, sending sparks upward, as though sealing their vow. Beyond the cabin walls, the mountain loomed silent and strong, bearing witness to a love that had survived shame, lies, and the cruelty of others. Yet, as they sat together, no papers were signed, no verdicts delivered. Tomorrow might bring fresh battles, more whispers, new attempts to break them apart. But tonight, under the shelter of wood and flame, they had chosen each other, and sometimes that was enough. Every time I share a story like this, I'm reminded how love can bloom even in the harshest places, mountains, storms, or the judgments of others. Cora and Gus's fight was not just for each other, but for the right to be seen as worthy of love. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from? Do you still believe, like Cora and Gus, that love can stand against all odds? If your heart says yes, then stay with us, because the next story is waiting for you.